definitely.
Yes, Terry, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Okay, it's a pleasure. Okay, let me quickly introduce myself. Sorry, I've got to say okay, okay. Yes, okay for recording. Let me quickly introduce myself. I've been in language teaching since the 70s, middle 70s. When I came into language teaching, it was, I think, in retrospect, it was a very naive profession. We were still doing listen and repeat all the time. It was still behaviorism largely. And testing was hardly considered as an issue. It wasn't something to be considered. If people did tests, well, teachers did them. Teachers wrote the tests at the end of the course, and that was it. There was no body of knowledge to go behind it. But in my time in language teaching, I've worked as a teacher, obviously, as a supervisor, as a director of studies. I worked for the British Council for some years as a direct teaching operation manager. And then my wife and I started a language school in the Sultanate of Oman. We were there for 12 years. And much of what I later went on to do was based on my experience there. I think that um, any kind of theory is incredibly valuable, but only if you're then able to take it into the real world and see how it applies. I was able to do that in my various roles. We sold the language school in '92, and since then I've worked as a consultant in over 30 countries and a management trainer, and also with my wife written quite a large number of language course books and testing materials, principally in the area of academic English. And that's where the interest in the academic placement test came from. So, what I would like to talk about today is placement testing. But in order to talk about placement testing, I think we need to put it into the whole context of language testing. How do we test language? What are we trying to achieve with the tests? And specifically, what are we trying to achieve with a placement test? Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, I'm going to show you a series of statements. They're about testing, language testing in general, although there are also statements about placement testing specifically. What I want you to do, as soon as you see the statement, don't really think about it. As soon as you see the statement, just say in your head true or false. And then we'll see some of the theory and some of the practice of testing language. And at the end, I'll show you this slide again and give you my answers, which you may or may not agree with based on today's session or your prior knowledge. Okay, so each time you see the statement, just say in your head, is this true or false? Okay, so those are the 10 statements which form the basis of today's session. Some of them involve some technical language like reliability, reliable, and validity, valid, which need to be explained. We talk about them a lot in testing, but what exactly do they mean, and how can we ensure that a test is reliable and valid? One issue with language tests is, of course, that there are several kinds of language tests. There are six main kinds of language tests. And again, in your own heads, just think for a minute, what do you understand by each of these terms? Have you got any idea what each of these terms refers to? What is a proficiency test? What is an achievement test? When we're talking about language, all of these are about language. What is a progress test? What is a diagnostic test? What is an aptitude test? And of course, what we're really here to talk about today, what is a placement test? The point is that these tests, each of these tests sets out to do something different and sets out to measure language knowledge and ability in a different way. See whether you got it right. A proficiency test measures overall knowledge or skills and is not linked to a specific course. So things like the Cambridge tests are proficiency tests. When you go to do a CET test or a PET test, the examiners don't know what you have studied before. What they're trying to find out is whether you have that proficiency, the A2 proficiency as measured by Key, for example. But a proficiency test may look forward to a course or a job. It may say, okay, you have this level. Therefore, you are able to take this course or you are able to do this job. An achievement test is almost the opposite of that. It measures directly what has been learnt over a particular period of time. So it's linked to a course or syllabus. And it looks back at the end of the course. Progress tests are very similar, but they check development over time. They're formative. They're given during a course. I think one of the things we fail to do sometimes as teachers, or failed, no, actually, sorry, let me put it in the past tense. One of the things we failed to do in the past was progress test. Now, all the big publishers, and the ones I work with included, we all make sure there are progress tests at all stages of a course, because there has to be feedback to the teachers about how individual students are progressing. Then you can say, you can change your approach either to this class as a whole or to individual students within the class. They show improvement, not level. A diagnostic test identifies strengths and weaknesses. It tries to come up with a detailed analysis of the skill or knowledge of the students so it can be used for planning what is to be taught. And really, in our field, diagnostic testing of language only has one use. Diagnostic testing is for individual teaching. So it's one-to-one. You give the test at the beginning of a one-to-one session, period, And you decide on the basis of that result, you decide, okay, well, I will do a lot of work on the simple past and the present perfect, but this particular student is fine on the present simple and future. So it looks forward to individual teaching. It decides what is to be taught. This is a slightly strange one, and it almost doesn't exist anymore. Again, in the 80s, aptitude testing was very popular. I did it when I did my master's. We had to take aptitude tests. We were given pieces of Welsh and tried to work out what the grammar rules of Welsh were, simply by looking at Welsh sentences and their translation into English. English people don't generally speak Welsh, so it was a genuine test of ability to understand the structure of a foreign language. But it was found to be, it's not based on current knowledge or skills, it's what your brain is capable of doing. But it was found to be largely irrelevant to the classroom. The fact that some students in your class have more aptitude, more ability to learn a language, what can you do with that knowledge? There's almost nothing you can do with that knowledge. It does look forward to likely success in learning. And the reason why I put it on the screen here is because that's exactly what a placement test also does. A placement test only works if it is found to have predictive ability. A placement test, I'll say it again, a placement test only works in the long term, is only successful if teachers and administrators feel that this is a good predictor, this test is a good predictor of whether the student will succeed in a particular level. So we get to the main target of today's session. Placement tests are designed to assign learners to the right level. I nearly put inverted commas around this word. I nearly put inverted commas around right, because we'll see during this session that the definition of right is actually very hard in testing of language. We know that's what a placement test should do. It should assign learners to the right level, A2, A2 plus, B1, whatever. The question is, how hard is that to do? And what is rightness anyway, when we talk about language level? Because we're trying to assign learners to the right level, it has to be a broad sampling of knowledge or skills. And very, very important, a placement test has to place students in an existing set of categories. You have to say where the student is going before you start writing the test. We didn't do that in the past. In the past, we had very vague words in English. You probably have the same vague words in Turkish. We had words like beginner, elementary, intermediate, higher intermediate. They're meaningless. Or rather, they have a meaning according to whatever is in somebody's head. The wonderful thing now, and I do genuinely mean that, I'm not being cynical about it, the wonderful thing now is we have CIFA. CIFA, the Council of Europe framework for language learning, not just English, of course, for language learning, is absolutely brilliant. It has flaws, of course it does. There are things in there that I don't agree with. But as a way of creating an existing set of categories, it is brilliant. Before CIFA, we would place a student in a higher intermediate class, and that simply meant whatever the course book had decided higher intermediate was, or even worse, what a particular teacher had decided what higher intermediate was. So, in order to achieve what we're trying to achieve, in order to create a test which places students, in order to create a placement test places students in the correct level, the right level. We must have reliability and we must have validity. These are the two absolutely key points of all tests, and obviously, therefore, they're key points of placement tests. But what does it mean? What is reliability? What is validity? The words have they have a clear meaning in general English, but what do they mean when we're applying them specifically to testing of language? Let me see if I can do something now. I'm just seeing if this system, Fatty, do you know, does your system, your version of Zoom, does it allow me, sorry, does it allow me to put people into breakout rooms?
Actually, I don't know this.
You don't know. Okay. Normally, there is just a tool at the bottom which allows me to put people into breakout rooms. I'm trying to find the tool. Does anyone know where the tool is? Is it under more? Can't see it actually. Okay, maybe we need to sort this out before another session, Fatty, because
Yeah.
the best thing now would be if people got into small groups and discussed these points. But at the moment, I can't actually see that tool on the bottom of my screen.
Yeah, next time before the Zoom session, we can arrange it easily.
Yeah, okay, okay, right. So let's try again, and I'll do it a different way. Right. Share. Okay, so first thing, again, I wanted you to talk in groups, but talk in your own head. What is reliability? When we're talking about language testing, what do you think reliability is? I'll give you 30 seconds just to think. What is a reliable language test? Okay, well, we can use the meaning in general English to help us understand this. If a person is reliable, then we can trust them. We can trust them to do something. If they say they will do something, they will do it. So clearly, reliability has something to do with trust. It's the consistency of results. Would the learner get a similar score again? If we gave this student in a month's time, for example, with no language learning, if we gave the student the same test, would they get the same result? And there are very powerful statistics like statistical tools, I mean, like Cronbach Alpha, that can look, and Kuda Richardson 21, which can look at a language test and say, this is reliable, this is consistent. You can trust the results of this. And obviously, everything that we produce, everything that I forgot to say, sorry, that I currently have a company called Innova, and we work directly with PQS. Everything that Innova produces, everything that PQS uses is reliable in this sense. It has passed through the psychometric studies and has reliability statistics. For example, the placement test, which we're going to be promoting, has a 93% reliability according to psychometric studies, and anything above 75% in a placement test is considered very, very successful. Yeah, I've got a chat point here. Let me just have a look. It means consistency. Yes, right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So reliability means consistency. How do you achieve reliability? Well, you reduce random factors. Sorry, what's it doing? You reduce random factors like luck, like guessing, and like something we call task effect. Luck is obvious. A lot of testing, as we'll see in a minute, as you know already, a lot of testing is ticking. It's saying A, B, or C. And of course, by definition, you can be lucky. If all you're doing is choosing A, B, or C, you could be lucky. The answer's A, and you happen to choose A. Or you simply guess. You have no idea of the answer, so you think, okay, I'll tick B. Interestingly, TOEFL used to penalize guessing. If you guessed, sorry, not if you guessed, if you got a wrong answer in TOEFL, they would take half a mark away. And then language teachers began to say, but just a minute, a lot of language use is guessing. It's kind of what we do. We say, well, I don't know. I've never learned this, but I think it's choice. Because somewhere in the back of your head, that word exists. You've heard it. You've seen it in this context. So I believe, as I understand it, Fatty, you're next to ETS. You can ask them whether they still penalise guessing, but I think they've stopped. I think they don't penalise guessing now because they realise that it's a kind of way of using language. This one's a very specific language testing point. It's called task effect. And task effect is when a language user fails a task because they didn't understand it, not because their English wasn't good enough to do the task. You can see immediately, I think, what the corollary of that is. You must be very careful about tasks in placement testing. You must not have complex tasks which people may not understand. They must understand immediately what the task is. And so reliability is essential for fair placement decisions. How can we achieve reliability? Use known task types, avoid task effect, use clear instructions. Examples are very good in testing. They are very good. I don't think they're used often enough. I think sometimes test writers are worried that the examples will somehow use up the things they want to test. But I think examples do work very, very well in testing, particularly in placement testing. Obviously, we've got to avoid ambiguous questions and double keys. We use the word key when we're talking about answers in testing. Double keys means there's two possible answers. We use objective scoring wherever possible, where there's only one right answer. And we use enough items. The larger the sample, the more reliable the result. I'll come back to that because that may not be self-evident to you, but I'll come back to that point in a minute. One thing I should say very strongly here, looking at these first three things here, use known task types, use clear instructions, avoid ambiguous questions and double keys. However good a test writer is, and I think I'm pretty good now, I've probably written several thousand language tests over the last 45 years. However good a test writer is, an item writer is, we need psychometric studies. We need the statistics to show, no, this isn't a good item because good students got the wrong answer. Or no, this isn't a good item because bad students got the right answer. Bad, sorry, I shouldn't have said bad. Weak students got the right answer. A test writer tries to avoid those mistakes, but only statistics can prove. Facility indexing and item analysis. All PQS tests are offered up to facility indexing and item analysis. So we are able then to adjust the questions to make the too easy ones harder, to make the too hard ones easier, and to move them around if we need to in the ranking order in the test. I said I'd come back to the idea of longer tests, and I'll give you just a very silly example of this. Imagine you want to decide whether, when you flick a coin, you want to decide, does it come down on average one side or the other? Is it 50-50? We all know it is. We all know on average it is. But if you did that test once, the result would be one side. If you did it twice, well, I don't know, it might still be one side. For British coins, I don't know if this is true in Turkey, but for British coins, we call it heads and tails. So British coins always have a head. It's usually a rather horrible picture of the king or queen. And then on the back, there's some other information like the denomination, 10 pence or something. So we talk about tossing a coin and making it heads or tails. If you do it twice, you might get two heads. If you do it 10 times, you might get 10 heads. We all know that you've got to flick and flick and flick and flick, and maybe after 50, you'll start to get the true answer. And this is the point, of course, I'm trying to make. You will start to get the true answer, which is that on average, there will be the same number of heads as tails, because that's probability theory. The same thing applies to language testing. The longer the test, the more reliable the result is likely to be. And I'll tell you something else really stupid. Even if the items aren't very good, even if the test items aren't very good, if you give a student 200 of those not very good items, you'll get a more reliable measure of their ability than if you give them 100 of those not very good items. So our tests, which PQS uses, are long. Some people might think they're too long. I want to get this over with. I want to get these students tested. Okay, but we want it to be reliable. So, for example, the academic placement test, which could be quite a high stakes test because of the result, how important the result is to the student and the institution, have 200 items. 200 items, that's a lot. That's a lot for someone to just sit in a room in front of a computer and do. But that's how we can achieve reliability. So if you need to justify it to your candidates, that's what you say. These large number of items ensure that we really know your level, that we don't get a false view of your level. You can probably work this out. And if I could make the system put you into groups to talk about it, I would ask you to do it. But for some reason, I can't at the moment. So What are the threats to reliability? Too few questions. I've just said that. Unclear or tricky wording, unfamiliar tasks. Now I didn't say this. Inconsistent marking. As soon as you have an open question of any sort, you have to decide how to mark that answer. Do you mark for spelling, for example? Do you mark for punctuation? Or do you only mark for grammar or correct choice of word? If you are going to have open items, then all of those criteria have to be decided before you even give the test to the people who are going to mark it. Too easy to guess, too easy to learn. There's one very stupid thing about multiple choice questions. All test specialists, all test professionals will tell you 4 choices is better than 3 because you can reduce guessing, you can reduce luck. All people involved in language teaching will tell you 4 choices is stupid because it's often impossible to make 4 reasonable choices. One of them will be stupid. So in the end, although you've got 4 choices, the student hasn't really got 4 choices because they can immediately dismiss one as saying, well, that's stupid, that's illogical, that doesn't work in this sentence, that's too low a level for the item that I'm trying to answer. Too easy to guess, and I'm afraid we have to worry about this, don't we? In the modern world, particularly with online testing, we have to worry about too easy to learn. Has somebody stolen the test? Has somebody hacked into the testing system and found that it's 1C, 3, 2B, 4A? At PQS, I won't tell you how many we have because that partly gives away the security as well. But we have multiple versions of each test. So, and sorry, the test your students take at a particular time is randomly chosen by the computer just before the test starts. So even if I have learnt 1A, 2B, 3C, 4A, even if I've learnt those, I've learnt them for test 1 and then my candidate gets test 2. And finally, external factors, fatigue and anxiety. We can't do much about anxiety, and I'm afraid we can't do that much about fatigue because tests need to be long. Placement tests need to be long. I guess all we can say to people is prepare them. This test is going to be 200 items and it will take you an hour to do this test. So, get some sleep. You can't learn for this test overnight. So get a nice night's sleep and be ready for the test in the morning. Okay, back inside your head now. This is harder because the word in general English is more complex to understand. We talk about things being valid, but what is validity? When we're talking about language testing, particularly if we're talking about placement testing, what is validity? Again, 30 seconds. What do you understand or what can you work out in your head about validity? Placement tests must have validity, but what does it mean? some good answers through the chat box.
Hello, I'm Michael.
Okay, so validity is the relationship to the target requirement. Validity is relationship to the target requirement. Sometimes it's given as an icon, it's given as a target where you try to shoot arrows into the target. To what extent do you hit the target with your testing items?
Arkadaşlar rica edebilir miyim ya? Mikrofonları kapatabilir miyiz lütfen?
So what do we mean by relationship? Sorry, what do we mean by relationship to the target requirement? We mean, does the test measure what we wish to measure? That is so obvious. Of course, the test measures what we wish to measure. No, you cannot be sure. You cannot be sure that a test measures what you wish to measure because it's not easy to come up with that decision. And unfortunately, we have to go further because validity in language testing goes further than just that first question I've put on the board. Does the test measure what we wish to measure? Validity is also about the relationship between the test and the outside world. That probably makes no sense to you at all. I'll show you what it means. The relationship between the test and the outside world. So the test is here, you're a student, you're sitting in front of it. Does it measure what we wish to measure? Yes, it does. Okay, but what about the relationship between this test and the outside world, the world outside of the testing room? The problem is that there is more than one type of validity in language testing. The first one is obvious, content. That's exactly what we were just talking about. Content, does it measure the right content? But we also have construct, and we have criterion, and we have face. I'm not even going to go for 30 seconds here, but just look at those three words and see if they mean anything to you at all. Construct, criterion, face. What do they mean when we're talking about placement testing? What is construct validity? What is criterion validity? What is face validity? Okay, so content validity, that's the easy one. Does the test cover the right content? Does it match the syllabus or the target level that we're trying to achieve? What we try to do with placement testing for PQS is we work with the CIFA levels, and each of our tests tries to make sure that we can place students at the correct CIFA level, at the level at which they need to enter a course. So if we say that a student is A2, we mean, this is a little bit strange, but we mean they need to enter an A2 course, not that they are able to take an A2 exam at that point. It's a little bit strange, I know, but that's one of the points about placement testing. Placement test puts students at the start of a level. not at the end of a level. There's no point in a placement test that says the student is A2, and then you put them in A2. No. When the test says the student is A2, you put them in A2 because that's what they're ready to start. The placement test is saying they have finished pre-A1 and A1 and A1 plus. They are ready to start A2. That's what we mean in our placement tests when we say a student is at A2. They're ready to start that level. So this is why I say target level. In a placement test, it matches the target level. It includes an appropriate range of skills, language forms, vocabulary. And again, CIFA is brilliant. When I was first in language teaching, we had no idea what skills were supposed to be at beginner level or higher intermediate. We had no idea which grammatical forms went into intermediate or advanced. We had no idea what vocabulary items should fit into elementary or higher intermediate. Mostly that was decided by the publishers when they put a book together. That's not true now. CIFA has homogenized everything. It's brought everything together. So the world now, the world of language teaching, understands what skills are expected in A2 plus and what language forms are there in B1 and what vocabulary you would expect a C2 student to be able to understand and produce. So content validity now should be very easy in principle for an item writer of a placement test because CIFA has brought everything together into a controlled environment. I wonder if you got anywhere with these other words. Let me just see what people said in the chat box. It'd be interesting. What did you say in the chat box? Yeah, okay. Yeah, some very good things in the chat box. Thanks. Keep putting things in the chat box, particularly while we can't work out how to do breakout rooms. Right. Okay, so construct validity. Construct validity, does the test measure the underlying ability? Does the test really measure the construct that you are trying to measure? For example, does it really measure communicative competence? Does it really measure the things required to pass a specific exam? Does it really measure coping in an English medium academic course? And this is where I take my stand on the Innova PQS academic placement test. I am a university lecturer. I have written books on English for academic purposes, everything from foundation level right up to PhD level. And I know what skills a student genuinely needs to cope in an English medium academic course. It's not just IELTS. IELTS is the gate. IELTS and TOEFL, and to a lesser extent, although it's a stupid exam, I hope you don't teach it, TOEIC, they are gates. They let you in. And they're okay as gates. I don't think they should be closed because they are better than nothing. But they do not tell you that the student can genuinely cope sitting in a lecture hall, going home and doing reading research of a literature review, attending a seminar and making meaningful contributions to what the tutor is asking, or indeed even sitting in the coffee shop after a lecture and discussing the points that the lecturer has made. So our placement test through PQS, our academic placement test, attempts to deal with that It attempts to say there are constructs involved in coping in an English medium academic course, and we will try to test them. For example, one thing you might find a bit shocking when you see our academic placement test is words are flashed on the screen, and the student then has to decide which word he saw. Words are spoken, and the student has to decide which words he heard. But these are key skills. These are key skills in decoding in real time language that you're receiving either orally or through written form. So tasks should reflect real language use. I'm running out of time, so let me get through this. Now, I mentioned that validity also has relationship to the outside world, and this is where it's so important that you're attending this session today, because you are as important as the placement test. I'll say it again, you are as important as the placement test. Criterion validity means, do the results of a particular test match other measures? For example, exam results that a student has already achieved, like matriculation from your secondary system, or your own judgment of this student's ability in language. Remember, placement testing, however good the item writer is, however good the whole construct of the test is, however good the content of the test is, in the end, it's just a sample of student ability. Whereas you, as a teacher who've worked with a student, if that's the situation, will have a better idea of the student's genuine ability and level. So placement tests must not replace teacher judgment. They must inform, but also allow teachers to make a different judgment. What I always used to say, because of course I wrote placement tests for my own language school, what I used to say was, I was happy with the reliability and validity of my placement test if there was no more than a 2% change by teachers after they started teaching the students. So if you took 100 students and you placed them in their levels, and then a week after the course started, the teachers came to me in my office and said, I need to move Abdullah and Jamila because Abdullah is much better than your test said and Jamila is much weaker. Then I would say, well, that's fine. Yeah, of course, you must move them. And if that's 2%, if that's 2 students out of 100, then I'm happy. If it's 20 students, no, I've got to go back and rewrite the test because that's no good. You mustn't have a 20% failure rate, but at 2%, it's not even failure. It's saying the teacher judgment is on a par with the test. The test will almost certainly, if it's well written, be a very, very good judgment, but the teacher is also capable of a very, very good judgment, either before the course begins, if you happen to know the students for some reason, or more likely, once the course starts and the student is sitting in front of you and they're supposed to be B1 and you can see at a moment that they are A2 or B2 because the test has somehow failed to correctly mark their level. So this is what I've just said in a very long-winded way. Criterion validity helps confirm the accuracy of placement. If teacher judgment only leads to a 2% change when you are exposed to the actual students, that's a very good placement test. If it leads to a 20% change, it's not a good placement test, and you need to consider carefully what you're going to do about it, feedback to the organization. Finally, this is a strange one. I don't know if any of you managed to, I can't see anything on this in the chat. I don't know if any of you managed to get this, but We now realize, particularly in a consumer oriented world where the student is king, and to a lesser extent, at least the teachers are queens or princes or something, face validity is vital. Does the test look right to users? They can't analyze it on content or construct or criterion, but does it look right? If I take this test as a student, and I come out and they say you're B1, do I say, yeah, okay, I'm B1? Or do I say, no, this test was stupid. I was given lots of ridiculous things to do, which I couldn't do, which I didn't understand. Does the test look right to users? Do administrators, teachers, students trust it? You've got to trust a placement test. If you don't trust it, without face validity, there will be limited acceptance, and then that will go into lack of confidence, and it will mean even more dangerously, there will be attempts to undermine the test. People will start to say, never mind, I know he got B2, but that's rubbish. The test is rubbish. Just put him in B1. So we must be sure that the tests we offer at Innova through PQS have face validity. So reliability means consistency, the same result again. Validity means accuracy, measuring the right thing. So here's a question. Again, inside your own heads. Can a test be reliable but not valid? You can put some things in the chat box if you want. Can a test be reliable but not valid? Can a test be valid but not reliable? Well, the answer to both, as you might imagine, is yes. A test can be reliable but not valid. For example, and I'm going back now to my early days of language teaching, most placement tests in the 1970s were multiple choice grammar tests. That was it. That was all we did. But we would often do that for a test for a course that was about speaking, for an oral test, for an oral course. A 60-item multiple choice grammar test is very reliable for testing grammar. It's got consistent scores, but it's measuring the wrong thing. You can measure the wrong thing very consistently. That's the stupid thing. A 60-item multiple choice grammar test is brilliant from that point of view, and you'll be very pleased with the result, except when you try to speak to the student. And some of them will be brilliant and some of them will be terrible. Can a test be valid but not reliable? Yes. Imagine you give people a short, informal speaking interview. In some ways, this was my favorite way of placing students in my own language school, because as a specialist, as a professional in not only language teaching, but language testing, I was able to say in a 10-item informal speaking interview, I was able to work out how good the student was, not just in speaking, but I was able to sense underlying grammar, underlying syntax, in other words, word order. Did they get the subject, verb, object, subject, verb, complement correct? I was talking to Arabs, and Arabic tends to put the verb first. And so that's a construct that I would recognize. But what about if there are no clear marking criteria? I don't know if you remember, it's a bit of a leap back to something, but I said when you design a test, the criteria, the categories have to already exist. You can't add them afterwards. You have to know where the students are going before you write the test, before you conduct the test. And that applies here as well. An informal speaking interview. Hello, how are you? How long have you been learning English? When did you start? How's your family? Do you have children? An informal speaking interview like that is only reliable if you have a clear set of marking criteria. I'm going to mark this student for accuracy, for fluency, for utterance length, and for pronunciation. And ideally, I don't mark it because I'm involved in the conversation. Ideally, an observer marks it who can be external to the conversation. If I have no clear marking criteria, then the problem will be that I have real communication there, but inconsistent. The expression we use in testing is inter-rater, inconsistent inter-rater scoring. So I, without thinking about it, I score highly on accuracy, and she, without thinking about it, scores highly on fluency, and he, without thinking about it, scores highly on pronunciation. So 3 people, 3 professionals get 3 levels for that student. You can measure the right thing very inconsistently. Okay, sorry, Fatih, how much longer have I got? Are we running? We're out of time now, aren't we? Sorry, you're mute.
Sorry, roughly 15 minutes. Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, right. So just 5 minutes then. Let's finish in 5 minutes. Why do reliability and validity conflict? You could make this chart yourself, but I'm going to give it to you. Reliability is better with controlled tasks. Reliability is better with a single possible answer. Reliability is better with receptive tasks where people are listening or reading. Reliability is better with standardized marking, the criteria that I just suggested, for example, accuracy, fluency, utterance length, and pronunciation. But validity is better with real communication. Validity is better with open-ended tasks. Validity is better with productive tasks, speaking and writing. Validity is better with flexible responses, where the student is allowed to make different kinds of responses, not some predetermined thing which the examiner is expecting. So the central problem is and in English, we say you have to square the circle. You have to accept that this is true, but as an item writer and as a person who is producing placement tests, you have to balance reliability and validity. Neither will be 100%, but you have to get a fair balance to the students who are taking the test. And here are some solutions that I come up with. Very important, add teacher judgment. Never get to the position. It's actually illegal now in Britain. I don't know if you got to this point in Turkey yet, but it's actually illegal now in Britain for something, for example, like a financial institution to say, computer says no. You're not allowed to do that in Britain. If you apply for a loan, if you apply for some money from a bank and they say, no, they can't say, our system rejected you. They can't say that now. They have to explain in human terms why you are rejected. We had about 20 years in Britain, maybe you had it in Turkey, where it was literally computer says no. And that was considered to be a reasonable answer. The algorithm was, God. We had to believe the algorithm. It's actually illegal now. I'm sure the companies find all ways of tricking us with it. But why that's relevant to placement testing is because the teacher is the final judgment, or should be the final judgment. So what we do with Innova PQS tests, we offer the jagged profile of the student from the placement test, that they got quite a high score in this type of reading, a lower score in this type of reading, quite a high score in this type of listening, a very low score in this type, very high grammar, very low vocabulary. And then the teacher can decide, okay, well, we take the average, fine. On average, the student is an A2 student. Or we say, no, we believe more strongly in reading, or we believe more strongly in listening. So we will place the student on that element of the profile. Good placement is a joint activity. It's a combination of testing and judgment. Okay, just to finish, a bit of fun. Nasruddin and the key. You know the story? You all know the story of Nasruddin and the key. Nasruddin loses his key. It's a dark night. He's walking home and he loses his key. And he's looking under the streetlight. And his friend comes along and he says, "What are you doing, Nasruddin?" Nasruddin says, "I'm looking for my key." He said, "Oh, you dropped it here." He said, No, I dropped it over there." So the friend says, "What? If you dropped it over there, why are you looking here?" He says, "Well, it's really dark over there." What's the point? What on earth has that got to do with language testing? We measure what we can measure. We look where we can look, and that's so dangerous. We mustn't just measure the things we can measure if we want a genuine placement test. It's very easy to measure grammar. We know exactly how to do that. It's quite easy to measure vocabulary. We know how to do that. It's much harder to measure skills, listening and reading, and very hard to measure skills, speaking and writing. Here's another silly one. Which is hotter, the bath or the coffee? Well, it depends what you mean by heat. The coffee has a higher temperature. The bath has more heat. What are you trying to measure? Are you trying to measure some kind of gradation, up or down, or some kind of breadth? Are you trying to measure whether the student can make present perfect, modal, continuous, passive? Or are you trying to measure whether overall their fluency in a wide range of tenses is good? What are we trying to measure? What we measure, we can only measure what we can measure, so we must understand what a given measure means. It's easy to measure reception, reading, listening, comprehension, grammar, vocabulary, control of form. It's much harder to measure production. Can it be done objectively? I've got one last point to make. Can speaking and or writing be inferred? Is there any way we can infer? Is there any way we can give a measure that is objective, but still say, you know what? This gives me a very good idea of how good this student's speaking is. This gives me a very good idea of how good this student's writing is? Well, the good news is linguists will tell you, yes, you can. And it's called proxy. We know as linguists that competence underlies performance. Competence is what a learner knows. Performance is what a learner can do. It's self-evident, but sometimes we don't make enough use of it, I think, in testing. It's self-evident that you cannot have performance until you have competence. Until you know something, you can't possibly produce it. Until I know that we use the present simple for habits and the present continuous for actions happening now, I can't correctly make a sentence about habit and a sentence about actions happening now. It's impossible. So competence precedes performance. It doesn't tell you anything about performance. That's the trouble. A very competent student may be hopeless in actually speaking or writing, but at least it can stand as a proxy. Competence develops before performance, so competence can be a proxy. It can stand in place of performance, and that's what we try to do in the testing we give to PQS. Obviously, true competencies must be identified clearly so we know what we want the student to know in order to underlie their performance. Okay, sorry, I'm going to completely out of time. So yeah, okay. So yes, one last general point here to reinforce the point of the teacher. Interpreting results. At PQS, we can report the results of a placement test in terms of the jagged profile of the student, their reading, their listening, their grammar, and their vocabulary. One strong or weak area does not define level. This is where we have to go and say, what are we trying to achieve? What are we expecting to happen to this student after they finish the test and go into a class? For example, if a student is weak in grammar, well, that can limit progress in all areas. So maybe if the jagged profile shows weak grammar, maybe we put them down to the lower part of their range. Or weak vocabulary can limit progress above A2. My experience is up to A2, vocabulary is really naming of parts. But above A2, English requires that students have a wide range of synonyms. They're able to understand and produce a lot of different ways of saying, I like, I enjoy, I often do, I go to, I have interest in. You know, synonyms are very important once you get to B1, to the threshold level. And the other thing to remember, classroom activity usually revolves around listening and speaking. So unless we can be pretty sure that a student is able to cope with the listening at a given level, even if their grammar is high, even if their vocabulary is high, maybe we put them down to the lower level, the level that their listening is coming out at, rather than their overall level of all the elements of the placement test. A placement test gives evidence, not decisions. Academic directors and teachers must interpret patterns, not just look at bands or scores. They must check borderline cases with additional speaking and writing. Okay, so the key takeaways from this session, I hope, are that reliability is consistency, validity is accuracy, a good test needs both, placement decisions depend on both, but placement decisions are decisions. They're not, computer says B2. No, they're not. They are, computer says, this is the profile of the student. Now you decide where to actually place that student. So I'll leave you now with the true or false. I'll leave you with my answers, and you decide whether you think they're true or false. All kinds of tests of language ability are basically the same. False. We've seen that different tests do different things. A longer test is usually more reliable than a shorter test. True or false? True. A student's overall score is the true measure of level. False. Profiles matter more than total score. A test can be reliable without being valid. Well, we spent about 15 minutes on that, so obviously, yes, it can be consistent but wrong. Grammar and vocabulary tests can give useful information about performance. True. They can act as a proxy for productive skills. If I know the grammar, if I know a lot of vocabulary, maybe I can speak well. Maybe I can write well. Two students with the same total score may need different placements. Yes. Skill profiles can differ. It's so common in language learning that we have a name for it. We call it jagged. We say students have jagged profiles. You can't draw a straight line. You've got listening, speaking, reading, writing. Multiple choice tasks are always less valid than open tasks. No, of course they're not. It depends on the design and the purpose. The validity of a multiple choice task can be perfect if it's well written and if we're trying to achieve a particular thing which can be revealed by that set of tasks. Placement tests should try to measure every aspect of a learner's ability. False. Placement tests are just a sample. They cannot measure everything. You'd have the student in the test room all day if you were trying to measure everything. Teachers should use test results and own judgment when placing students. Yes, obviously, teacher judgment is essential. And finally, a placement test should include a range of easier and more difficult items. I haven't covered this, I realize, now looking at this 10th question, but the answer, of course, is yes. And the easier items should come first. The easier items should come first, so you don't teach students to fail. You don't teach candidates to fail. If I see 3 questions I can't answer, I probably won't answer the 4th question because I'm fed up. I'm dispirited. I'm actually crying at this point because I don't understand what this test is all about. So tests that Innova does for PQS, they start with easy items and they gradually move to harder items. And the result of that is we get good discrimination across the levels. Okay, that's it. I'm sorry. I've spoken for more than I've actually spoken for even more than an hour, but I am still here. If you would actually like to ask me any questions, unmute and ask me. If you need to rush away or go to bed, then that's okay as well.
Thank you very much, Terry. This is really nice for all of us.
Thank you.
And any question or anything that you say, Mürüvvet Hocam, Engin Hocam, Gözde Hocam, Natal Hocam, Nergiz Hocam, Gözde Hocam, Özlem Hocam. So we are good students, no questions. We
I never know whether that's good or bad, actually. I am getting some lovely symbols on the left of the screen, so I guess that's good. I haven't seen that before, to be honest. I'm actually more used to lecturing in a lecture hall than Zoom, but I will find out before next time how I get you into breakout rooms, because it is important that you're able to discuss some of these things with each other.
Okay.
Okay, lovely. Well, thank you very much.